Marcus Thompson stood perfectly still at his post outside Buckingham Palace, his red tunic immaculate and his bearskin hat positioned just so. Tourists snapped photos, trying to make him smile or flinch. But Marcus remained stone-faced. To them, he was just another ceremonial guard, a living statue in fancy dress. What they didn't know was that beneath that traditional uniform beat the heart of one of Britain's most lethal soldiers. The morning had started like any other. Marcus had risen at 0500 hours, completed his physical training, and prepared his uniform with military precision. Each button polished, each crease razor sharp. He took pride in his appearance, even if most people saw it as mere pageantry. As he marched to his position that Tuesday morning, Marcus caught snippets of conversation from passing civilians. "Look at those toy soldiers," one businessman muttered into his phone. "All show and no substance. Probably couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag." Marcus kept walking, his expression unchanged. He was used to such comments. The general public had no idea that the Queen's Guard were active-duty soldiers from elite regiments. They saw the ceremony and assumed it was all for show. At 0800 hours, Marcus took his position at the palace gates. The familiar weight of his SA-80 rifle felt comfortable in his hands, though most onlookers assumed it wasn't even loaded. They were wrong about that too. The first few hours passed without incident. School children pressed their faces against the railings, their teachers explaining the history of the guard. Marcus listened with half an ear while maintaining his vigilant watch. Despite appearances, he was constantly scanning for threats, his trained eyes picking up details others missed. Around midday, a group of young men approached the gates. They were loud, clearly having been drinking despite the early hour. Marcus assessed them immediately, potential troublemakers, but likely harmless. Still, he remained alert. "Oi, soldier boy," one of them called out. "Bet you've never even held a real gun, have you? Just playing dress-up for the tourists." His friends laughed, encouraged by what they perceived as an easy target. Marcus continued staring straight ahead, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I bet I could take that rifle right off him," the leader boasted, stepping closer to the gate. "These palace guards are all for show. Wouldn't know real combat if it bit them on their fancy red bottoms." A small crowd began to gather, some tourists filming with their phones, others looking uncomfortable at the escalating situation. Marcus remained motionless, but every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring. The drunk man pressed his face against the railings. "Come on then, toy soldier. Show us what you're made of. Oh wait, you can't even move, can you? Just a pretty ornament." What the man didn't know was that Marcus Thompson had served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the Welsh Guards before being selected for the Queen's Guard. He had 18 confirmed kills as a sniper and had once held off an entire Taliban assault single-handedly for 4 hours until reinforcements arrived. More importantly, what none of them knew was that Marcus was currently on secondment from the Special Air Service, the SAS, Britain's most elite special forces unit. His posting to the Queen's Guard was temporary, a brief respite between classified missions that had taken him to some of the world's most dangerous places. But Marcus couldn't tell them any of this. His orders were clear: maintain discipline, protect the palace, and under no circumstances break character unless there was a genuine threat to the royal family. The drunk man's friends were egging him on now. "Go on, Dave. See if you can make him blink." Dave pressed harder against the railings, his face red with alcohol and bravado. "Useless tin soldier. I bet you've never even been in a real fight." Marcus's finger twitched slightly on his rifle. In his mind, he calculated the exact force required to disarm and restrain the man without causing permanent damage. It would take exactly 2.3 seconds. But he held himself in check. A police officer appeared, walking slowly toward the disturbance. Marcus felt a slight relief, but the situation was about to take an unexpected turn that would test every ounce of his training and discipline. As the officer approached, Dave suddenly reached into his jacket pocket. The movement was quick and aggressive, and for a split second Marcus's combat instincts screamed danger. His training kicked in automatically. In Afghanistan, such movements often preceded an attack. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was central London, and Dave was just pulling out his phone to take a selfie. However, Marcus's momentary tension had been noticed by someone in the crowd, someone who would soon change everything. Standing at the back of the gathering was Colonel James Hartwell, recently retired from the SAS and now working as a security consultant. He had been walking past when the commotion caught his attention. Unlike the other onlookers, Hartwell's trained eye had caught Marcus's subtle reaction to the perceived threat. The way the guard's weight had shifted almost imperceptibly onto his back foot. The slight adjustment of his grip on the rifle. The micro-expression of assessment that flickered across his features for just a fraction of a second. Hartwell frowned. That wasn't the reaction of a ceremonial guard. That was the response of a soldier who had seen real combat. His interest was piqued. The police officer finally reached the group and began dispersing the drunk men, much to Dave's disappointment. "Show's over, lads. Move along now." As the crowd began to break up, Hartwell lingered, studying Marcus with professional interest. Something about this particular guard intrigued him. The man's bearing was different from his colleagues. There was an alertness, a coiled readiness that spoke of recent combat experience. Marcus, meanwhile, had returned to his standard position, but he was aware of Hartwell's scrutiny. His peripheral vision had caught the man's prolonged observation, and his trained instincts told him this wasn't just another curious tourist. The afternoon wore on, but Hartwell remained nearby, sometimes sitting on a bench with a newspaper, sometimes walking past the gates. He was conducting his own form of surveillance, and Marcus began to realize he was being studied by someone who knew what to look for. As his shift neared its end, Marcus maintained his stoic facade, but his mind was racing. Who was this man? And why was he so interested? In his line of work, unwanted attention was never a good thing. At 1600 hours, the changing of the guard ceremony began. Marcus performed his duties with the same precision he brought to everything else, his movements crisp and professional. But as he marched away from his post, he caught Hartwell's eye for just a moment. In that brief exchange of glances, two professionals recognized each other across a crowded courtyard. Hartwell smiled slightly and nodded, a gesture of respect between soldiers. Marcus didn't respond, but something had changed. The game of cat and mouse was about to begin, and neither man knew where it would lead. As Marcus disappeared into the palace complex to change out of his ceremonial uniform, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully maintained cover was beginning to unravel. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and he sensed that the man who had been watching him would play a significant role in what was to come. What Marcus didn't know was that Colonel Hartwell had already made several phone calls that evening. By morning, certain people in very high places would be asking questions about the mysterious guard who moved like a special forces operator. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force Marcus to reveal exactly who he really was, and why one of Britain's most elite soldiers was standing guard in a red coat and bearskin hat. The next morning brought unseasonably thick fog to London, shrouding the palace grounds in a gray blanket that reduced visibility to mere meters. Marcus arrived for his shift earlier than usual, something nagging at him about the previous day's encounter with the observant stranger. As he adjusted his uniform in the guard room, Sergeant Major Williams approached with an unusual expression. "Thompson, you've got visitors today. Some bigwigs from the ministry want a word after your shift." Marcus kept his face neutral, but his pulse quickened. "Any idea what it's about, Sergeant Major?" Williams shrugged. "Above my pay grade, lad, but they seemed very interested in your background. Asked specifically about your previous postings." This was not good news. Marcus's current assignment was supposed to be completely compartmentalized. If people were asking questions about his background, it meant his cover might already be blown. He took his position at the gates with extra vigilance that morning. The fog made his job more difficult, creating perfect concealment for anyone who might wish the royal family harm. His combat instincts were on high alert. Around 1,000 hours, the fog began to lift slightly, and Marcus spotted a familiar figure approaching through the mist. Colonel Hartwell walked with purpose toward the palace gates, but this time he wasn't alone. Two men in dark suits flanked him, their bearing unmistakably military despite their civilian clothes. Marcus's trained eye cataloged everything about them in seconds. The way they moved in formation, constantly scanning their surroundings. The slight bulges under their left arms that indicated shoulder holsters. These weren't civil servants or politicians. These were operators. Hartwell stopped directly in front of Marcus's position and spoke in a voice just loud enough to be heard. "Good morning, Guardsman Thompson. Beautiful day for standing perfectly still, wouldn't you say?" The use of his name sent alarm bells ringing in Marcus's head. This was definitely not a coincidence anymore, but protocol demanded he remain silent and motionless, so he stared straight ahead as if he hadn't heard anything. "You know," Hartwell continued conversationally, "I've been thinking about our little moment yesterday. That reaction time of yours was quite impressive. Very few ceremonial guards would have assessed a potential threat with such professional competence." One of the suited men stepped forward slightly, his hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. The movement was subtle, but Marcus caught it immediately. His own grip on his rifle adjusted by millimeters, a change invisible to tourists but clear as day to trained soldiers. Hartwell held up a hand, stopping his companion's advance. "Easy, Richards. I don't think the good guardsman here means us any harm. Do you, Thompson?" Marcus remained statue still, but sweat was beginning to form under his bearskin hat. This was rapidly turning into a standoff, and he was at a severe disadvantage. 3 against 1 in broad daylight, with hundreds of civilians around. Not ideal odds by any measure. "Tell me," Hartwell said, pulling out what appeared to be a casual smartphone but was likely much more sophisticated, "what would happen if I were to make a certain phone call right now, say, to a particular base in Hereford? I wonder what they'd tell me about a certain Sergeant Thompson who's supposed to be on classified assignment." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Hereford was home to SAS headquarters. If Hartwell knew about that connection, then this wasn't just fishing, this was a targeted operation. The colonel smiled slightly. "I thought that might get your attention. You see, gentlemen," he addressed his companions, "what we have here is a very interesting situation. A soldier with Thompson's particular skill set doesn't get assigned to ceremonial duties by accident. Which raises the question, what is an SAS operator really doing dressed up as a palace guard?" A group of tourists approached, cameras ready, but one of Hartwell's men smoothly intercepted them, politely redirecting them to better photo opportunities elsewhere. Within moments, the area immediately around Marcus was clear of civilians. "Now then," Hartwell continued, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way. I represent certain interests that are very curious about your real mission here. National security interests, you understand. So I'm going to ask you directly, are you here to protect the royal family, or are you here for some other purpose?" Marcus felt the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on him. His orders were explicit: maintain cover at all costs. But those orders hadn't anticipated being directly confronted by what appeared to be intelligence operatives who already knew his true identity. The fog continued to swirl around them, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Through the mist, Marcus could see other guards at their posts, completely unaware of the drama unfolding just meters away. Hartwell checked his watch. "I'll give you 60 seconds to decide, Thompson. After that, we'll have to assume you're a security threat and act accordingly." The man called Richards had now positioned himself to Marcus's left flank, while the third operative moved to his right. It was a classic containment formation, and Marcus recognized it immediately. These men knew exactly what they were doing. 40 seconds. Marcus's mind raced through his options. He could maintain his position and hope they were bluffing. He could attempt to break containment and retreat into the palace complex. Or he could do something completely unexpected. 30 seconds. Through his peripheral vision, Marcus noticed something the others hadn't. A maintenance van had been parked across the street for the past 20 minutes, but the driver hadn't gotten out to perform any work. The van's engine was still running, and there was a slight glint from the passenger window that suggested surveillance equipment. 20 seconds. This wasn't just about him anymore. Someone was running surveillance on the palace, and these men confronting him might be part of a larger operation. His protective instincts for the royal family kicked into overdrive. 10 seconds. Marcus made his decision. In one fluid motion, he stepped back from his post and spoke for the first time, his voice low and controlled. "Colonel Hartwell, we need to talk. But not here. There's a van across the street that's been conducting surveillance for the past 20 minutes. Hartwell's eyes immediately snapped to the vehicle Marcus had indicated. His expression shifted from smug confidence to sharp alertness. "Richards, confirm that target." Richards pulled out compact binoculars and focused on the van. After a moment, he nodded grimly. "Confirmed. 2 occupants, definitely running surveillance. Professional setup." The dynamic of the confrontation changed instantly. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't the target. He was a potential ally in identifying a real threat. "Thompson," Hartwell said quietly, "what else have you observed?" Marcus quickly shared his tactical assessment. The van arrived at 0947 hours. Driver kept engine running. Passenger has been photographing the gate rotations. They're mapping our security protocols. Hartwell made a quick hand signal, and his team shifted from containment formation to protective positioning around Marcus. "Can you maintain your post and continue observing while we investigate?" "Negative," Marcus replied. "If I return to position now after this conversation, they'll know they've been made. Better to rotate me out and bring in a replacement." It was a sound tactical decision, and Hartwell nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. We'll debrief properly once we've dealt with this situation." As if on cue, the van's engine revved, and it began to pull away from the curb. Richards spoke rapidly into a concealed microphone, coordinating with other units to track the vehicle. "Thompson," Hartwell said, "it appears you've just proven your value. Perhaps we should reconsider our assumptions about why you're really here." Marcus straightened his shoulders, his cover blown but his mission intact. "Sir, with respect, you don't have the clearance to know why I'm here. But I can tell you that the safety of the royal family is my absolute priority." Hartwell studied him for a long moment, then slowly smiled. "I think I'm beginning to understand. You're not just guarding the palace, you're hunting something, or someone." The colonel's perceptive observation hit close to the mark, but Marcus remained silent. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with apparent allies. "Very well," Hartwell said. "We'll play this your way for now. But Thompson, When the time comes that you need backup, you know how to reach me." He handed Marcus a business card that appeared blank but would likely reveal contact information under the right conditions. Then he and his team melted away into the fog as quickly as they had appeared. Marcus stood alone at the palace gates, his mind reeling from the encounter. His cover was blown, but perhaps that wasn't entirely bad. He now had potential allies who might prove useful when the real threat finally revealed itself. Because Marcus knew something that Hartwell and his team didn't. The surveillance van wasn't random. It was part of a pattern he'd been tracking for weeks, a pattern that suggested someone was planning something very dangerous indeed. As he prepared to rotate off his post, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement in an upper window of the building across from the palace. Just a shadow, there and gone in an instant, but enough to confirm his growing suspicion. The real threat was still out there, watching and waiting. And Marcus Thompson, elite SAS sniper, temporarily disguised as a ceremonial guard, was the only thing standing between them and their target. 3 days after his confrontation with Colonel Hartwell, Marcus received the intelligence briefing he had been waiting for. The surveillance van had been traced to a terrorist cell with connections to several European extremist groups. More importantly, intercepted communications suggested they were planning an attack during the upcoming state visit of the German Chancellor. Marcus sat in a secure room deep beneath the palace, finally able to speak freely about his true mission. Across from him sat Hartwell, along with representatives from MI5, MI6, and the Metropolitan Police's counter-terrorism unit. "For the past 8 weeks," Marcus began, his voice steady and professional, "I've been conducting covert surveillance while maintaining my cover as a ceremonial guard. We received intelligence that someone with advanced military training was planning an assassination attempt on a member of the royal family." Commander Sarah Chen from the counterterrorism unit leaned forward. "What kind of intelligence?" Chatter picked up by GCHQ suggested a former sniper, possibly ex-military, had been contracted to carry out a high-profile assassination. The target wasn't specified, but the timing coincided with several upcoming royal engagements. Hartwell nodded slowly. "So, you were positioned as both protection and hunter. Clever. Use the ceremonial posting as the perfect cover for a counter-sniper operation." "Exactly. My orders were to identify the threat while maintaining absolute operational security. The fewer people who knew, the better." Marcus pulled out a tablet displaying detailed surveillance photos. "Over the past month, I've identified 17 potential vantage points within effective range of the palace. 13 have been eliminated as impractical. Of the remaining 4, 3 have been under intermittent surveillance by individuals who don't fit the normal pattern of tourists or local workers." He pointed to a building across from the palace gates. "This one in particular. Same individual, different disguises, but I've positively identified him on 4 separate occasions. Always checking sight lines, always measuring distances." "Description?" Chen asked, taking notes. "Male, approximately 35 to 40 years old, 6 feet tall, athletic build. Moves with military bearing despite attempts to appear casual. Most importantly, he has a distinctive scar on his left hand, probably from an old wound. I got a clear photo yesterday." Marcus swiped to reveal a high-resolution image captured from his hidden position. The man in the photo was indeed studying the palace grounds with obvious professional interest. Hartwell studied the image intently. "I know this face. Jonathan Reeves, formerly of the Parachute Regiment. Discharged 3 years ago under circumstances that were questionable." "What kind of questionable?" Chen pressed. "He was suspected of selling equipment and intelligence to private military contractors. Nothing proved, but enough smoke to force him out. Last known address was somewhere in Eastern Europe." Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. A disgraced ex-paratrooper with sniper training and flexible morals, perfect candidate for a contract killing. "The question is," said the MI5 representative, "when is he planning to strike?" Marcus had been thinking about this constantly. The German chancellor's visit is in 2 days, maximum security, maximum publicity, maximum political impact. If I were planning an assassination, that would be my window. Commander Chen stood up abruptly. "Right, we need to coordinate a response. How close can you get to this Reeves character?" "That's the problem," Marcus replied. "If I break cover now, he'll know he's been made and will either abort or accelerate his timeline. Either way, we lose him." "So what do you propose?" Hartwell asked. Marcus looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "I maintain my post during the Chancellor's visit, but this time I'm not just standing guard, I'm hunting." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were talking about a potential sniper duel in the heart of London, with the German Chancellor and members of the royal family as stakes. "Absolutely not," Chen said immediately. "Too many variables, too much risk." But Hartwell was nodding thoughtfully. "Actually, it might be our best option. Thompson knows the terrain. He's been tracking this target for weeks. And he has the skills to neutralize the threat." "And if he misses?" the MI5 agent asked pointedly. Marcus's voice was ice cold when he replied, "I don't miss." The confidence in his statement wasn't arrogance. It was simple fact. During his time with the SAS, Marcus Thompson had established himself as one of the finest marksmen in the entire British military. His record spoke for itself: 23 confirmed kills in combat, including a shot at 1,247 meters in Afghanistan that had become legendary within Special Forces circles. But this would be different. This wouldn't be a battlefield in a foreign country against clearly identified enemies. This would be central London in broad daylight, with civilians everywhere. "What would you need?" Hartwell asked. Marcus had already thought this through. "First, I need Reeves to think he's been successful in remaining undetected. That means my normal rotation continues unchanged. Second, I need backup positioned at the 3 other potential sniper locations, just in case I'm wrong about his chosen position." He paused, considering the most difficult part of his plan. "Third, I need a weapon swap. The SA-80 is perfectly adequate for close protection, but if I'm engaging a target at distance, I need something with more precision." "What are you thinking?" Hartwell asked. "Arctic Warfare Sniper Rifle, 338 Lapua Magnum rounds, effective range out to 1,500 meters, which covers every possible shooting position in the area." Chen shook her head. "How do you propose to carry a sniper rifle while dressed as a ceremonial guard?" "Kind of defeats the purpose of maintaining your cover." Marcus smiled for the first time since the briefing began. "Leave that to me. I have an idea." 2 days later, the German Chancellor's motorcade approached Buckingham Palace precisely at 1100 hours. The streets were lined with ceremonial guards, including Marcus Thompson, who stood at attention with his traditional SA-80 rifle. What the crowds of onlookers and media couldn't see was the Arctic Warfare rifle concealed within the guardroom just 10 meters behind Marcus's position. What they also couldn't see was Marcus's earpiece, connected to a secure communications network linking him with counter-sniper teams positioned throughout the area. "All stations, this is Control," came the voice of Commander Chen. "Chancellor's motorcade is approaching the palace gates. Maintain overwatch." Marcus scanned the building where he expected Reeves to appear. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. The Chancellor arrived, inspected the guard of honor, and proceeded into the palace for the formal ceremony. Then, at 11:27 hours, Marcus spotted movement in a third-floor window of the target building. A brief glint of metal, quickly concealed, but unmistakably the barrel of a rifle being positioned. "Control, this is Guardian," Marcus spoke quietly into his concealed microphone. "Target confirmed. Building 7, third floor, northeast window. Copy that, Guardian. You are cleared to engage." This was the moment Marcus had been preparing for. Without breaking his ceremonial stance, he spoke to the guardsman positioned behind him. "Rotation now. Emergency protocol." The other guard immediately understood and stepped forward to take Marcus's position. In the same motion, Marcus stepped backward into the guard room, invisible to external observers for exactly 12 seconds. In those 12 seconds, Marcus performed what would later be described as the fastest weapon swap in military history. Off came the SA-80, out came the Arctic Warfare Rifle, already loaded and zeroed for the exact distance to the target building. He moved to a prepared firing position at the guard room's rear window, a location he had scouted weeks earlier. Through his scope, he could see Reeves clearly now, setting up his own rifle and aiming toward the palace courtyard where the Chancellor would emerge in approximately 3 minutes. "Target acquired," Marcus whispered into his microphone. Taking the shot. The math was simple. Distance, 247 meters. Wind speed, negligible. Target, stationary. Marcus controlled his breathing, feeling his heart rate slow as his training took over. Through his scope, he could see Reeves adjusting his own weapon. The man was clearly skilled, his movements economical and professional. In another life, they might have been allies, but not today. Marcus squeezed the trigger. The 338 Lapua Magnum round traveled the distance to its target in less than a second. Through his scope, Marcus saw Reeves suddenly jerk backward as the bullet struck him in the shoulder, spinning him away from his weapon and sending him crashing to the floor. "Target down," Marcus reported calmly. "Non-fatal hit. He'll need immediate medical attention." Within minutes, armed police had stormed the building and taken Reeves into custody. A subsequent search revealed not only a high-powered sniper rifle, but also detailed plans of the palace grounds and schedules for the German Chancellor's visit. Marcus quickly stowed his rifle and resumed his ceremonial position, just in time for the Chancellor to emerge from the palace for the departure ceremony. To the watching crowds and media, nothing had happened. The guards stood in perfect formation, the ceremony proceeded flawlessly, and the visiting dignitary departed safely. That evening, Marcus sat in the same secure briefing room where the operation had been planned. Colonel Hartwell placed a glass of whiskey in front of him. "Shoulder shot was deliberate, I assume?" Hartwell asked. Marcus nodded. "He's more valuable alive. Intelligence will want to know who hired him and what other operations might be planned." "Remarkable shooting," Commander Chen added. 247 meters, through a window, with civilians in the background. And you chose a non-fatal shot." Marcus sipped his whiskey thoughtfully. "The shot wasn't the hard part. The hard part was spending 2 months pretending to be something I'm not while hunting a professional killer." Hartwell laughed. "I think you'll find that pretending to be a ceremonial guard while actually being one of Britain's most elite soldiers is exactly the kind of mission the SAS specializes in." "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now you go back to your regular duties," Chen replied. "Though something tells me they won't involve quite so much standing still." As Marcus prepared to leave the briefing room, Hartwell handed him a folder marked with the highest security classifications. "Your next assignment. Seems there's a situation developing in the Middle East that requires someone with your particular combination of patience and precision." Marcus glanced at the folder's contents and smiled. After 2 months of standing motionless in a red tunic, the prospect of active operations seemed almost relaxing. 3 days later, the newspapers ran small articles about a foiled terrorist plot against the German Chancellor. The stories mentioned increased security and the arrest of a suspect, but gave no details about how the threat had been neutralized. None of the articles mentioned that it had been stopped by a single shot fired by a man in a bearskin hat who the world had assumed was just there for decoration. Marcus Thompson had returned to the shadows where elite soldiers belonged, but for 2 months he had proven that sometimes the most effective disguise is hiding in plain sight. The tourists who had mocked the toy soldiers would never know that one of those guards had just saved lives with a precision shot that would be talked about in military circles for years to come. The Queen's Guard resumed their duties, standing motionless at their posts, protecting the royal family with the same dedication they had always shown. But now, perhaps, observant visitors might look a little more carefully at those red-coated figures and wonder what secrets lay beneath the ceremonial facade. Because in the British military, things are rarely what they appear to be, and the most dangerous soldiers are often the ones you never see coming.